What a boy, which the world labeled broken, could see in a 2-ton beast no one else could? What would happen when the condition that made it an outcast if it revealed the only key to the impossible? A fortune was at stake, but what was about to be achieved was worth much more than money. The arrogance of a billionaire has launched a deadly challenge, waiting for a spectacle of fear and failure. He didn't have Leo. It did not have a different kind of courage, born not of strength, but of empathy. Get ready for a story that will redefine everything you think about bravery, connection, and the hidden power that resides on those we dare to underestimate. The arena is set up, not for a fight, but for a silent miracle that will silence the world. Leo existed in a world painted with 2 vibrant colors, a whirlwind of sounds and thoughts that collide without permission within his mind. For the teachers of a small rural school, he was the problem boy, the one who could not be quiet in the chair, whose eyes danced through the window, following the flight of a bird while the math lesson dissolved in the air. The diagnosis came as a stamp, a word that adults use to explain their chaotic universe, ADHD. For Leo, however, it was only his way of being, a constant current that dragged him away from the margins of normality. He saw no disorder, saw details that no one else seemed to notice, the way dust danced on sunbeams, the intricate pattern in the wing of a dragonfly, the subtle change in the wind before the rain. His notebook was a map of mazes and sketches of fantastic creatures, a refuge where his mind escaped when the world became too slow and gray. His energy, which overflowed and put him into trouble, was the same as he allowed him to run through the fields for hours, feeling each sheet, every stone under his bare feet, in a silent communion with the surrounding nature, and unlike people, did not judge him. While Leo's mind spun in his own orbit, a few kilometers away, in the vast and opulent property of billionaire Arthur Sinclair, he lived a trapped fury. It was called Orion, a pure bull, a mountain of bright black muscles, with a pair of horns that seemed to have been carved into an old ivory. But his nobility was overshadowed by uncontrollable anger, a fire that burned in his eyes and turned him into a force of destruction. No pawn, however experienced and brave, could approach. Orion was a legend of violence, born of whispers over abuse in his origins, a rodeo champion who had been broken and transformed into an indomitable beast. He was Sinclair's dark trophy, a symbol of his power, proof that he could even have what could not be controlled. Her breath echoed through the valleys at dusk, a guttural sound that carried the loneliness and pain of a powerful creature, but terribly alone, imprisoned not only for steel fences, but for her own fearful reputation and the fear she inspired. Leo's family struggled to keep his head out of water. The small farm where they lived, once prosperous, was now withering under the weight of debts. Leo's father, a man with heated hands and a tired look, looked at the horizon with a concern that gnawed him every day. The mother, with a kind smile that could not hide the sleepless nights, mended clothes and multiplied the few foods, trying to protect the son from the hard reality that surrounded them. Leo felt the weight of his parents' despair as a storm cloud. He listened to the whispered conversations late at night, words like mortgage and execution that, although not fully understood, sounded like monsters to the lurking. He saw the way his father looked at his own hands, as if they had lost the ability to support the world he had built. This family anguish was another noise in the chaos of his mind, a serious and constant sound that he could not ignore, and that aroused in him a deep and overwhelming desire to do something, to find a magic solution that could erase the lines of concern from his parents' faces. Orion's story was told in the village with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was the hill monster, the devil of Sinclair. The men at the bar exchanged exaggerated stories about their strength on pedestrians that had narrowly lost their lives while trying their luck. For most, he was just that, a horror story to tell dark nights. But Leo heard something different in these stories. When the wind brought the distant sound of Orion's bustle, Leo didn't hear just anger. In the middle of his own inner whirlwind, he recognized a family note, an echo of his own frustration. He imagined the loneliness of the bull, the confusion of being so powerful and yet so powerless. While the other saw a monster, Leo saw a misunderstood creature, a being whose language was fury because no one had given themselves to the work of learning his true language. This empathy was his secret, an invisible bridge that his mind built between his own chaos and that of the animal. He felt an affinity with that force of nature that, like him, seemed not to fit into the world. The contrast between the two worlds was stark. On the one hand, the rustic simplicity of Quinta de Leo, where life was dictated by the sun and rain, and the greatest wealth was shared love around a modest table. On the other, the Sinclair mansion, a glass and steel fortress that rose over the landscape as a monument to arrogance, where the silence was filled not by the chorus of birds, but by the buzz of safety systems. Leo lived in a world of textures, of earth under his nails, from the smell of wet hay. Sinclair lived in a world of abstractions, numbers in a bank account, power exercised through a call. And in the middle, as an inevitable collision point, it was Orion. The bull was the anomaly that united these two disparate universes, a prisoner of the world of Sinclair, and a mystery he called for the spirit of the world of Leo. The existence of the bull was a constant reminder of the disparity of power, the injustice of a world where a man could have a life only on a whim. Leo's childhood was a silent preparation for a fate that no one could predict. Every moment, when his attention was deviated from the classroom to observe the complex patterns of a fly flight, was a focus training. Each time his overflowing energy led him to explore the wildest nooks of the forest, he was learning to read the silent language of nature. His ADHD, his curse in the eyes of the world, was sculpting in him a unique set of skills. Its keen sensitivity, its ability to perceive micro-expression and subtle changes in the environment, their empathy for creatures that did not communicate with words. The world tried to force him to enter a box, but his mind refused, expanding in directions no one else could follow. He was becoming an expert in chaos, a master of finding patterns where others only saw disorder. It was a disguised gift, a key that silently waited for the right lock. Orion's reputation, on the other hand, was forged in violence and fear. Each failed attempt at the tame only added one more layer to his range of fury. Men's methods were always the same: brute strength, strings, shouts, whips. They tried to break their spirit without realizing that the spirit was already broken, and what they faced were the shards. Orion had learned that humans were a source of pain and confinement. Its aggressiveness was a defense, a shield forged in trauma. He did not know kindness, did not know patience. His world was an arena, and his only answer was to fight. His physical power was immense, but it was his memory of pain that made him truly dangerous. He was not bad by nature, had been taught to be fearsome, and Sinclair, his owner, was delighted with this reputation, for the indomitability of the bull was reflected in his own image of absolute and untouchable power. Leo, in his innocence, saw through the facade. He did not know the concept of beast or monster just as adults. For him, everything that lived and breathed had a story, a reason for being. He spoke to the trees, with the streams, with the insects, not because he expected a verbal answer, but because he recognized that everything was part of the same flow of life. He saw the pain in the eyes of a bird with a wing departure, the joy in the barking of a dog chasing a ball. This perception, pure and without prejudice, was what differentiated it. When he heard of Orion, his imagination did not paint a demon with horns, but a great sad creature. He wondered if Orion had ever felt the pleasure of the sun on the back without the shadow of an arena, or if he had ever eaten fresh herb without the bitter taste of fear. These were questions that no one else asked, questions born of a mind that worked differently. And so the two beings, the boy and the bull, lived their parallel lives, both misunderstood, both isolated in their own worlds. One was arrested in a whirlwind of mental stimuli, the other in a steel and anger prison. One was considered deficient by society, the other aberration of nature. None of them knew, but their ways were converging, pulled by invisible wires of despair, hope, and an audacious challenge that would soon become the world upside down. The stage was being mounted, not for a confrontation of strength, but for a meeting of souls, where the key to the salvation of one would be the unusual condition of the other. The perfect storm was forming on the horizon, and in his eye was a boy who saw too much and a bull who felt too much. The world was not prepared for what was about to happen. Arthur Sinclair was a man who was easily bored. Having gained business empires, the world had become his personal recess, and he longed for shows that money alone could not buy easily. Orion was his latest and most frustrating acquisition. The indomitable and magnificent bull represented the only challenge that its vast fortune had not been able to subdue. On an afternoon of boredom, as he watched from an air-conditioned porch, plus a failed attempt to subdue the beast, a grand and arrogant idea sprang into his mind. It would be an event, a power show. He decided to launch a public challenge, a proclamation that would echo across the region and beyond it. He summoned the press, organized an event in the nearest city square, and with a predator smile announced his proposal: $100,000, an amount that would change the life of anyone in that rural community, to the person who could simply stay in the arena with Orion for 80 seconds and calm the beast without injuring it. It was an act of pure arrogance, a way of displaying both its wealth and the indomitability of its wilder possession. The news spread like fire in dry straw. Local newspapers stamped with Sinclair's face and Orion's threatening image on the first page. The radio stations repeated the ad every hour: $100,000. The amount was astronomical, almost mythical for families that, like Leo's, counted each cent. The magnata's proposal became the only topic of conversation. In the cafes, in the fields, in the churches, people debated the madness of the offer. Most saw it as a death sentence disguised as an opportunity. The most brave and experienced pedestrians in the region ripped their heads, knowing Orion's fury firsthand. They knew it was not courage, but suicide. The challenge was designed to be impossible, a spectacle where the man would be humiliated by the beast for its owner's guio. He was a modern Roman circus, and Sinclair was the emperor, offering bread and circus with a generous dose of deadly danger, only for his personal entertainment and to reaffirm his dominion. For Leo's family, the news came not as an opportunity, but as a cruel reminder of his own impotence. $100,000. It was the exact number that could save your fifth, pay your debts, and give them a future. Leo's father sat at the kitchen table that night, the newspaper clip in front of him. His face is a mask of despair and resignation. It was unreachable money, a treasure guarded by a dragon. Leo's mother was looking at him, her eyes full of silent sadness. Hope was torture when he was holding hands with the impossible. They were trapped, watching the ship sinking, while a golden but inaccessible island shone from a distance. The atmosphere at home became even heavier, the dense air with non-said words and shared fears. Sinclair's challenge brought them hope. He only stressed the depth of the abyss they were in, making their poverty even bitter. Leo, however, processed the news differently. He did not hear the danger, did not focus on the fear that paralyzed everyone else. In his mind, the news was linked to a different frequency. $100,000 was the sound of concern to disappear from his father's face. Orion was not the monster that everyone described. It was the lonely and misunderstood creature he thought at a distance. And the challenge. The challenge was not about fighting or mastering. Sinclair's words, "Calm the beast," echoed in his mind. Calm down. It was not to subdue, it was not to defeat. It was understanding. In the midst of his mental chaos, an absolute point of clarity emerged. A silent and unshakable conviction began to form. He could do that. He didn't know how to explain. He didn't have the language to articulate the certainty he felt. But it was a truth as real as the ground under his feet. He felt that his different way of seeing the world was precisely what was needed. Leo's decision was not announced with a crash, but with a whisper. One night, seeing his father looking at his accounts with his shoulders bowed by defeat, Leo approached and simply said, "I'll do that. I will calm the bull." The words hovered in the air, so absurd that, for a moment, their parents thought it was just another fantasy of their imaginative son. But then they saw their gaze. There was no usual glow of distraction. There was an intensity, a focus that rarely saw him, and which scared them more than anything else. His mother began to cry, begging him to take that crazy idea out of his head. His father, for the first time, raised his voice to him, forbidding him to even think about it. It was his job to protect him, and he would fail if he let his only son walk to a certain death because of his financial despair. Their reaction was of love and fear, a protective wall that was instantly lifted around the boy. But Leo's conviction was waterproof to his parents' panic. His mind, so often a stormy sea, was now focused on a single point with the clarity of a laser. The ADHD, which made him jump from one thought to another, has now manifested itself as hyperfoco, an ability to focus so hard on something that the rest of the world disappeared. And his focus was Orion. He began to spend hours near the limits of Sinclair's property, hidden between the trees, just to observe. He did not see a monster. I saw a prisoner walking in circles. Body language shouted stress and fear. He noticed the way the bull's ears moved to the smallest sound, how his flanks trembled. He was not planning a fight. I was studying, learning a language. His silent determination was more powerful than his family's screams. They saw him risk life. He was trying to save theirs. The community reacted to the news of Leo's intention with a mixture of penalty and derision. "The strange boy of the Silva," they said. Poor the despair of the family must have made him lose his judgment. It became a tragic anecdote, a symbol of madness that poverty could inspire. No one took him seriously. When his father went to the city to enroll Leo's name in the official list of challengers, an act that broke his heart, but which he made under his son's unshakable insistence, Sinclair's employees laughed at each other. The list was full of names of former rodeo champions, muscled men, and hunters of emotions. And among them, the name of a child with a well-known history of problems. The inscription was accepted as a bizarre formality, a curious footnote in the Great Sinclair Show. The world underestimated him, seeing only the label that had placed him, blind to the depth that hid behind him. As the day of the challenge was approaching, hope, however fragile and terrifying, began to infiltrate the heart of Leo's family. His unshakable calm, his methodical dedication to observing the bull, began to erode the certainty of the disaster. They could not understand their method, but they began to see that there was a method. His hope was not based on logic, but on the irrational faith that a father and mother have in their son. They prayed, not for victory, but for security. The amount of $100,000, once the main focus, began to fade in the background, replaced by the overwhelming concern for the boy's life. Sinclair's gold challenge, conceived as a monument to his own vanity, had become, for this small family, a final test of faith, love, and the terrifying possibility that his son, the boy the world considered broken, could really see something no one else could. Magnata's proposal was a catalyst. Launched into the world as an act of arrogance, she traveled on unexpected paths, lighting desperation in a family and awakening a sleeping gift in a boy. Sinclair wanted a show of brute strength and failure, a predictable entertainment. He believed he controlled all variables, from the fury of his beast to the greed of men. But he didn't have Leo. It did not have a participant whose award was not just the money, but the salvation of his family. It didn't have a challenger whose secret weapon was not the strength, but empathy. And above all, it did not have a neurological condition that, instead of being a disadvantage, would prove the key to unraveling Orion's puzzle. The challenge was launched. The pieces were moving, and the result, which seemed so certain to Sinclair, was about to be turned inside out by an unlikely hero. The day of the first date arrived under a merciless sun, which cooked the earth and made the air shake over the Sinclair arena. The tycoon, for pure whim and to have fun with the audacity of the problem boy, granted Leo a training session, a preliminary meeting before the big event. The arena was an imposing circle of wood and steel, a modern coliseum built for the entertainment of one man. Leo was in the center, small and insignificant in the middle of the vast length of dirt. The silence was heavy, filled only by the buzz of insects and the beats of their own heart. His parents watched from afar, hands with so much force that their nodes were white, the pale faces of fear. On the other side, on his shaded porch, Sinclair watched with a binocular, a smile of contempt to play on his lips. He expected to see tears, panic, a humiliating withdrawal. He expected a quick and satisfactory spectacle of human fragility in the face of the brute force he controlled. The steel gate was opened up, a sharp sound that cut silence. And then Orion came up. He did not run. Exploded into the arena as if fired from a cannon. The earth trembled under its legs. He was even bigger and more intimidating closely, a mass of tense muscles and contained fury. His black hair shone under the sun, and the steam came out of his nostrils in furious tails. He stopped, shaving the floor with the front paw, his red eyes fixed in the small figure in the center. The air crawled with a dangerous energy. Any other man would have retreated. He would have sought an escape route. The survival instinct would shout to run. The multitude of farm workers who had gathered to watch arrested his breathing collectively, waiting for the inevitable onslaught, the violent collision that seemed to be the only possible outcome for that surreal scene. It was the embodiment of the nightmare, the force of nature on a collision route with innocence. But Leo didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just stayed there and did something no one expected. He sat down. He crossed his legs on the hot dust, his hands on his knees, and waited. His outer world, fear in his parents' eyes, the contempt of Sinclair, the imminent danger, all faded. His mind, driven by the hyper-focus, filtered everything except the bull. He did not look at Orion as a threat, but as the focus of his universe at that moment. His gaze was not challenging, but curious. He observed the way the bull muscles were contrary to the skin, the rhythm of his agitated breathing, the subtle movement of his ears to capture each sound. He was not facing a monster. I was reading a book written in a language of tension and fear. Its stillness was the most disconcerting and provoking thing that Orion had ever faced. There was no aggression to answer. There was no fear to explore. There was only one calm and observant presence. Orion was confused. His entire life had been a series of violent interactions. He was scheduled to respond to aggression with more aggression, fear with a domain demonstration. Leo's passivity was a puzzle. The bull took a few hesitant steps, snorting, his head swinging back and forth. He made a fake onslaught, abruptly stopping a few meters from Leo, raising a cloud of dust. Leo didn't even blink. He just tilted his head slightly, as if trying to see better. Orion Bramu, a sound that would make the bravest of men back, but Leo remained sitting, his calm shield. Slowly, the bull's initial agitation began to give way to cautious curiosity. He began to circulate Leo, maintaining a safe distance, his great black eyes trying to decipher that anomaly. For the first time, someone in your arena didn't want to fight him, didn't want to escape him. It was just there. It was a completely new experience for the animal's traumatized mind. The minutes dragged on, becoming an hour. The sun moved in the sky. The contempt on Sinclair's face was slowly replaced by an incredulous perplexity. The fear in the faces of Leo's parents gave way to a trembling astonishment. They were witnessing the impossible. Leo was still sitting, and Orion continued to circulate, getting closer and closer. The rhythm of his breathing began to slow down. His tails became less frequent. The tension in your posture began to relax, very subtly. He no longer scraped the floor. Its tail, before whipping the air in agitation, now shook more smoothly. Leo, feeling this change, began to do something even stranger. It began to hum, a low and monotonous melody, speechless. It was not for the bull, but for himself, a way to calm his own inner noise, to focus even more at that time. The sound, however, traveled through the arena, not as a challenge, but as a neutral and soothing vibration. This was the first lesson. Leo realized that Orion's fury was not a source of energy, but a shield that consumed a huge amount of energy to be kept. Its calm was forcing his bull out of his struggle or escape, and he was running out. The animal, not used to this state of prolonged alert without confrontation, began to show signs of tiredness. He stopped circulating and simply stopped to observe Leo. It was then that Leo first moved. Very slowly, without sudden movements, he lay sideways on dust, exposing his body, an act of supreme vulnerability. He put his head on his arm and closed his eyes. For the observers, it was an act of madness to freeze the blood. For Leo, it was an act of communication. He was saying in the most basic body language, "I'm not a threat. I trust you." The silence in the arena became absolute. Everyone expected Orion to take advantage of that moment of apparent weakness to attack. The bull stepped forward, then another. He lowered his head, massive, the ends of his horns inches from Leo's fragile body. Leo's mother released a muffled sob, unable to look. His father prepared to jump the fence, the paternal instinct to override everything. But Sinclair, fascinated, lifted a hand in a gesture for everyone to wait. Orion's damp muzzle stopped near Leo's hair. He smelled the boy, the smell of the earth, the sun, and the innocence, so different from the smell of sweat and the fear to which he was used to. He blew a lamp of hot air, making Leo's hair fly. And then he did something that no one, not even in his craziest dreams, could have imagined. He lay down. The mountain of muscles and fury, the indomitable beast, folded his legs and lay on the dust, a few meters from the boy, and let out a long sigh. A sound that was not anger, but of deep and old tiredness. That moment was the beginning of everything. A forged connection, not through words or strength, but through an older and more fundamental language. That of stillness, vulnerability, and the absence of fear. Leo didn't tame Orion. He offered him a sanctuary. He created a space where, for the first time in his life, the bull needed not to be the beast that everyone expected him to be. He could simply be. The image of the boy and the bull, both lying on dust under the scorching sun, in peace, was an image that burned the retina of all who saw it. Sinclair lowered the binoculars, his face a screen of contradictory emotions, shock, unbelief, and perhaps for the first time in many years, a spark of genuine admiration. He had planned a spectacle of violence and dominion, but what he obtained was a silent and powerful lesson on a completely different force. The first date ended when Leo, as calmly as he had sat, got up and left the arena, leaving Orion lying alone. He didn't look back, did not seek approval. He simply walked toward his parents, who ran to hug him, tears running freely, tears no longer fear, but of incomprehensible relief and pride. Sinclair remained on her porch for a long time, looking at the bull that now seemed different, as a majestic sleep waiting instead of a monster. The challenge of $100,000 was still standing. The big event was yet to come, but something fundamental had changed. The question was no longer if the boy would survive. The question was what else he would be able to do. The dust arena had become a sacred ground, and the heart of a beast had begun to heal. In the days following the first date, Leo established a routine. Every day he returned to the arena. There was no tension of the first day. The event had become a silent ritual, a shared meditation between the boy and the bull. Leo didn't try to hurry things. He did not have a final goal in mind for each session except to simply be present. He sat on dust sometimes for hours, while Orion folded or resting across the arena. His ADHD, which in the structured world of the school made him unable to focus, found his purpose here. He entered a state of hyperfoco, where every detail of the bull became his only universe. He'd learned to distinguish the different sounds of Orion's breath, to associate them with states of calm, alert, or irritation. He observed the tremor of a muscle on his hip, the subtle movement of his ears, the blink of his eyes. It was Orion's tics, the signs that revealed his inner state, and Leo became the world's greatest expert in them. He began to realize that the key was not to impose his will, but mirror and validate the state of the animal. When Orion was agitated, Leo didn't try to calm him straight. Instead, he adopted a warning stance, showing the bull that he was also aware of whatever was disturbing him, the sound of a distant truck, the smell of a predator in the wind. By validating the anxiety of the bull, he created confidence. He was communicating. I see what you see, I feel what you feel. And then, very slowly, Leo relaxed his own posture, took a deep breath, and the bull, feeling the calm of his partner, followed the example. It was a dance of emotional regulation, A speechless conversation. Leo was using his keen sensitivity, a product of his unique neurology, to tune into another creature to a level no one else could. He was discovering his secret language, one that was based on infinite patience and meticulous observation. Thursday and even Sinclair workers began to observe these daily sessions with a growing fascination, which at first seemed a bizarre lock. A consistent method was now revealed. They saw Leo lie in the arena and Orion lie beside him. I saw him walking slowly toward the bull, always stopping at the slightest hesitation on the animal. Leo learned the limits of Orion, his personal space, and respected them religiously. Never forced contact. Instead, he expected the bull to start him. And eventually Orion began to do so. First, a hesitant touch with the muzzle in Leo's leg, then allowing Leo to touch his massive neck for a brief second. Each breakthrough was celebrated by Leo, with quiet and acceptance, reinforcing behavior with the absence of threat. It was a desensitization process, built on a mutual confidence foundation that became stronger every day. It was during one of these sessions that Leo discovered the true gift of his ADHD. On a particularly suction day, the noise of trees and objects to be blown from the wind kept an Orion in a constant state of agitation. The bull could not relax. Leo, instead of feeling frustrated, let his own mind accompany chaos. He did not try to filter the stimuli. He hugged them. He focused on the sound of the wind, the movement of the leaves, the approaching rain smell, just as Orion was doing. And in the midst of that sensory overload, he found a pattern, a rhythm. He began to beat his fingers on the dust, accompanying the rhythm of the gusts of wind. Orion, who was being bombarded by the same stimuli, noticed Leo's rhythm. The rhythmic sound gave him a point of focus, something predictable in the midst of unpredictable chaos. Slowly, the bull's breathing began to synchronize with Leo's beats. At that moment, Leo realized his ability to see and process multiple stimuli simultaneously was not a disability. It was the tuning tool. He could enter Orion's sensory world and give him order. The secret language evolved. Leo began to use subtle sounds to communicate. A click with the tongue to get attention. A low whistle to signal calm. A severe buzz to correspond to the relaxed breath of the bull. They were not commands, but invitations. He was creating a shared lexicon. Orion, in turn, responded with his own body language. A backward ear was "I am listening." A head down was a sign of trust. A long sigh was the maximum expression of contentment. His communication became so refined that Leo could predict Orion's actions seconds before he performed them. He knew when the bull wanted to scratch his head, when he wanted to get up, when he was thirsty. Sinclair, watching through her security cameras, was perplexed. She saw a child and a bull interact with a harmony that challenged all logic and experience. It seemed magic, but it was science. The science of empathy and neurodiversity. Leo's parents, though still nervous, no longer tried to stop him. They saw the change in their child. The boy, who could not focus on school, was now focused on a complex task for hours. His restless energy had become a calm dedication. He looked more centered, more at peace with himself. For the first time, his problem had found a positive application, and this was healing not only the bull, but also Leo himself. He found a place where his different mind was not an obstacle, but the very key to success. He was gaining confidence, not only in his ability to interact with Orion, but in his own identity. The arena became your classroom, and the bull your teacher. And the most important lesson he was learning was that his greatest gift was to be exactly who he was. The news of the extraordinary connection between the boy and the bull began to spread beyond the gates of Sinclair's property. An initially skeptical local reporter was allowed to observe one of the sessions. The article he wrote did not speak of a rodeo event, but a silent miracle. He described the boy's patience, the visible change in the bull, the silent conversation that unfolded before his eyes. The story was caught by larger news agencies. The challenge, which had begun as a billionaire's vanity show, was becoming much deeper. He was becoming a history of hope, of interspecies, and the hidden potential in those that society marginalizes. The focus was deviating from $100,000 and focusing on the unlikely relationship that flourished in the dust arena. As the official challenge day was approaching, Leo knew it was ready. Your trust was not coming from arrogance, but of knowledge. He knew Orion. He knew his fears, his joys, his triggers. He had learned his language. He didn't go to the arena to tame a beast, as the challenge said. He was going to meet his friend. The cash prize was important to his family, but what he had discovered within himself and his connection with Orion was an incalculable treasure. He had discovered that his mind, that the world saw as disorderly, contained the ability to create order, to calm the storm, both his and others. The gift that had always been there, hidden in the sight of everyone, had been finally revealed. Leo and Orion's journey to that point was one of mutual discovery. The boy taught the bull that not all humans were a source of pain, and the bull taught the boy that his unique way of perceiving the world was a superpower. Leo's patience, born of his ability to get lost in the present moment, and its focus, the ability to filter the world to a single point of interest, were the tools that built the bridge between two species, between two misunderstood beings. The secret language they developed was not in the books, could not be taught. It had to be felt. And while the world was preparing to watch the final show, only Leo and Orion knew the truth. The real challenge had already been overcome. What left was just to show the world what they already knew. Official challenge day dawned with an electric atmosphere. What had begun as a local event had become a media phenomenon. Reporting trucks aligned on the road that led to Sinclair's property. A small bench, built in a hurry, was crowded with journalists, photographers, and some VIPs invited by Sinclair, who's now seen at the center of a very different story than he intended to create. He was no longer the puppet master to display his beast. It was the perplexed host of an imminent miracle. The air kicked with anticipation and unbelief. Would it be real? Could a child really have appeased to Orion's legendary fury? Or had everything been a series of fortunate coincidences? The $100,000 award had almost become a footnote. What the world wanted to see was if the connection they had read in the newspapers was genuine. They came to a show, but they didn't know what kind of spectacle they were about to witness. Leo arrived with his parents. He didn't wear cowboy boots or spectacle clothing, just his spent ganga pants and a simple t-shirt. He looked calm, almost oblivious to the media circus that surrounded him. His parents, on the other hand, were a beam of nerves, but under the fear, there was a glow of fierce pride. When Leo walked toward the entrance of the arena, a silence fell on the crowd. All the cameras turned to him, the most unlikely hero they had ever seen. He did not recognize the crowd. His focus was already on the way, his mind to filter the clicks of the chambers, the whispers, the tension in the air. For him, there was only the arena, the Earth circle where his friendship with Orion had flourished. He stopped at the entrance, took a deep breath, not for nervousness, but to focus, to tune his mind with the task ahead. Sinclair, watching from his porch, felt a shiver. The boy's calm was more intimidating than any demonstration of strength. The official chronometer was placed on a large digital screen, 80 seconds. The challenge was simple. Enter the arena, and for 80 seconds, calm the beast. The steel gate opened with its familiar winch, and Orion entered. But this was not the same bull that had exploded to the arena weeks earlier. He entered with calm steps, his head erect with a quiet majesty. He saw Leo waiting and stopped, his eyes fixed on the boy. There was a recognition, a stillness. The crowd arrested her breath. Leo entered the arena, and the gate closed behind him. The chronometer began the decreasing count. 80, 79, 78. The whole world seemed to be counting on it. Leo didn't look at the screen. Time didn't matter to him. He stepped forward, then another, using the same slow and deliberate walk that Orion had learned to trust. He did not go straight to the bull. Instead, he began to walk in a large circle, mirroring the movements Orion had made in his first date. Orion noted Leo, his head turning slowly to follow him. There was no tension in your body. There were no signs of aggression, just focused attention. Leo issued a soft click with his tongue, the almost inaudible sound in a crowd, but perfectly clear to the bull. The ear of Orion contracted in response. It was your secret greeting. The chronometer marked 60 seconds. Leo stopped walking and turned to face Orion directly. He knelt in the dust, becoming smaller, less imposing. He put his huge head on the floor a few inches from the boy and closed his eyes, dropping a long, happy sigh. The crowd was absolutely silent. There was no single chamber click, a single whisper. Time seemed to have stopped. In the big screen, the numbers continued to go down. 30, 29, 28. Leo spread his hand slowly and landed it on Orion's muzzle. He started to scratch the area under the eye of the bull, a place he had discovered that Orion loved. The bull tilted his head to his hand, a giant of almost 2 tons, to enjoy a child's kind touch. They stayed there, the boy and the bull, in a perfect picture of peace, oblivious to the world that watched them, lost in his bubble of mutual trust. It was more than calming the beast. It was a communion of spirits. Leo was not performing a task. He was simply being with his friend. The chronometer reached 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. The final count with a silent whisper in everyone's mind. 3, 2, 1, 0. A doorbell sounded, signaling the end of the 80 seconds. But the sound seemed a violent intrusion at the sacred moment. For a long moment after the bell, no one moved. The silence was deep, reverent. Then a single sound broke the spell. Someone in the crowd began to applaud. The sound was followed by another, and then by an overwhelming wave of applause and vivid that erupted from the bench and the workers of all. People were openly crying. Veteran journalists lowering their cameras, simply absorbing the scene. On his porch, Arthur Sinclair was standing. His face, usually a mask of cynicism, was undone. He was not looking at the boy or the bull. He was looking at something inside himself that he hadn't seen for a long time. Its arrogance had been shattered and replaced by an overwhelming feeling of admiration. He had offered money for a domain spectacle, and in return, the universe had given him a lesson of humility and grace. Leo got up slowly. He had a last party on Orion's head, whispered something that only the bull could hear, and then walked toward the now open gate. He did not smile triumphantly, did not wave to the crowd. His face was serene, as if he had just woke up from a quiet dream. He walked directly into the arms of his parents, who enveloped him in a hug that contained an ocean of love, relief, and such a huge pride that it could not be expressed in words. The 80 seconds were over. The challenge had been fulfilled. But what happened in that arena greatly transcended the terms of a bet. The world did not see a boy tame a beast for money. He saw proof that empathy is a more powerful force than fury, that patience can move mountains, and that a gift, even though labeled as a disorder, can, in the right environment, change the world. The silence that Leo and Orion created in those 80 seconds was higher than any angry. It was a silence that spoke of trust, connection, and unexpected beauty that can be found when looking beyond the surface. It was a silence that ashamed to be arrogance, which dissolved the fear and that left an indelible mark in all who witnessed it. Sinclair's challenge had finished, but the story of Leo and Orion was just beginning. Not only had they shocked the world, they had calmed him, showing him a different kind of strength, a different kind of courage. And in that silence, a new legend was born. The day after the challenge, Arthur Sinclair did something that shocked the world almost as much as the event itself. He summoned a press conference, not on his opulent but a broad porch near the now famous arena, with Leo and his family by his side and with Orion to graze peacefully on a nearby meadow. Sinclair announced that he would pay the first 1,000 promised dollars. But that, he said, was just the beginning. He publicly admitted that his challenge was born of arrogance and boredom, but that Leo had taught him a lesson about the true meaning of strength and value. He announced that he was creating the Orion Foundation, dedicated to studying and promoting methods of human-animal interaction based on empathy. And his first act was to donate $10 million to the foundation, appointing Leo and his parents to the board of directors, with Leo playing a vital role as the main consultant, and soon as his age allowed him. The life of Leo's family has become overnight. The amount of $100,000 alone was enough to save your fifth and secure your future. But involvement with the foundation gave them a new purpose. They were no longer just the parents of the problem boy. They were the guardians of a new legacy. His fifth ceased to be a place of struggle and became a sanctuary. With part of the back, they expanded the property and, under Leo's guidance, began to welcome other mistreated and misunderstood animals. Horses that had been considered too wild, dogs that had been abandoned for being aggressive. The fifth became a rehabilitation center where the Leo method, patience, observation, nonverbal communication, was the main form of therapy. Their story became a lighthouse of hope, proving that healing was possible for both animals and people. The greatest legacy, however, was the change in Leo's perception. He was no longer seen through the prism of his diagnosis. The ADHD, which was once a source of difficulty and stigma, was now celebrated as the source of its extraordinary gift. Scientists, psychologists, and animal behavior experts came from around the world to study their interaction with Orion. They theorized that their mind, capable of processing the world in a nonlinear and hyperfocal way, was uniquely equipped to tune into the nonverbal consciousness of an animal. Leo became an involuntary defender of neurodiversity. Its story has taught the world that conditions like ADHD are not deficiencies, but differences, with its own challenges, but also with its own unique superpowers. Schools began to look at their difficult students with new eyes, wondering that hidden gifts could be waiting for the right environment to flourish. What about Orion? He never saw the interior of a rodeo arena. Sinclair, in a genuine heart change, transferred the full ownership of the bull to Leo. Orion became the most famous and beloved resident of the new sanctuary. He spent his days in vast green pastures, often with Leo sitting quietly by his side, reading a book against his massive flank. The bull, once a symbol of indomitable fury, has become a global icon of peace and the extraordinary ability to recover the spirit. His image, side by side with Leo's, was printed on books and documentaries, inspiring millions of people. He was living proof that no creature is beyond redemption, that anger is often just a mask for pain, and that healing begins with a single act of understanding. His friendship with Leo was a silent and powerful testimony of the transforming power of empathy. The courage has been redefined. Before Leo's story, the courage associated with a bull was that of the killer or the pawn, a courage of confrontation and dominion. Leo showed the world a different kind of bravery, the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to be patient, the courage to sit in silence in front of danger and offer confidence instead of aggression. He proved that true power does not reside in subjugating others, but in connecting with them. Heroism has learned the world. It does not require a sword or a bond. Sometimes it only requires an open heart and the desire to hear what is not said. Its history has become a modern parable, teaching that the greatest strength of all is kindness, and the greatest victory is the one that is achieved without a single battle. Leo and Orion's legacy was not in money or fame. It was in the small changes that inspired worldwide. He was in the child with autism that was encouraged to pursue his passion for standards, in the adolescent with dyslexia that was celebrated by his visual creativity, in the scared animal in a shelter that received a second opportunity with a new kind of patience. Its history planted seeds of compassion and understanding in unexpected places. Arthur Sinclair, the cynical billionaire, spent the rest of his life to fund projects that promoted empathy, trying in his own way to honor the lesson that the boy and the bull had taught him. His fortune, once an ego monument, became an engine for good. The new fortune of Leo's family was not just financial. It was a wealth of purpose, of love and acceptance. They had their son back, not the broken boy that society had told them they had, but the extraordinary child he had always been. They lived, surrounded by the gratitude of the animals they saved and the admiration of a world that had been changed by their history. His fifth became a place where differences were celebrated and where the most unlikely ties were forged every day. It was a living legacy, breathing, a testimony of the fact that sometimes the things that make us different are the same ones that allow us to make a real difference. Years later, when Leo was already an adult young man and a world-respected leader in the field of animal welfare, they asked him what was the secret of his connection with Orion. He smiled, a calm smile that still contained the brightness of that boy in the dust arena. "There was no secret," he replied. "I did not see a monster. I saw a being that was shouting, but no one heard him. My mind, who is always hearing too much things at the same time, was the only one who managed to distinguish his scream in the middle of the noise." The boy's story with ADHD and the indomitable bull has become eternal. Not like a fairy tale, but as a reminder that in each living being there is a story waiting to be heard. A reminder that courage has many forms, and that the most silent is often the strongest. It is a reminder that sometimes the key to tame our greatest beasts, both exteriors and interiors, is not strength, but the simple and revolutionary will to understand. Their legacy was not written in history books, but in the hearts they touched, proving forever that a single act of empathy can, in fact, shock and change the world.